We determined that ultimately the psyche, the mindset of the founder or leader of the organization acts as either a multiplier of the potency of all of the other 9 principles, or actually it impedes the efficacy or impact of the other 9 principles. Simply the way the leader thinks is a determinant of scaling success. Do you not hear a growth-oriented leader saying, I can't do that? That will typically be suffixed with the word yet, which leaves it very, very open that I'm on a journey. I may not be able to achieve what it is that I want to achieve yet.
Made to Grow, the podcast for SME manufacturers, brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system. Over the coming 10 episodes, we've got a host of experienced manufacturers, industry thought leaders, and subject matter experts sharing their personal stories and professional insights to help you on your manufacturing success story. So, stay tuned and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts for a new episode every fortnight. Welcome back to the Made to Grow podcast, the podcast for SME manufacturers from Flowlens. This week, I'm talking to Brendan McGurgan, former CEO of a globally successful engineering business and now scaling expert, author and fellow podcast host with the ScaleX Insider podcast. We'll be talking about the importance of leadership mindset, vision setting and self-awareness on your journey to manufacturing growth, and some key actions you can take to help you better understand and develop your own growth mindset. Let's jump right in. Welcome, Brendan McGurgan, to the Made to Grow podcast.
Thank you very much, Rich. Delighted to be on the show.
Brendan, we obviously go a way back, and I'm delighted to have you on the podcast. You've an illustrious career, and now shining the light for scaling SMEs through your simple scaling business, your well-thumbed book here, and the ScaleX Insider podcast. So really delighted to have you on the show. Could you give our listeners a wee bit more of a sense of what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Yeah, sure. Look, thank you. That's a very generous intro. And once again, look, congrats on the show. And I wish you all the very best with your own podcast. What gets me out of bed in the morning now is my own purpose to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. So 3 years ago, I co-founded a business, as you alluded to, called Simple Scaling, to address very much a crisis within the SME sector, the small and medium-sized enterprise sector. To give you a little bit of color and context to that, Rich, I had spent 20 years prior to that immersed in the world of scale-up. My background's in finance. As soon as I qualified as an accountant, chartered accountant, I moved into industry. It's not something that I wanted to pursue as a profession. So as soon as I qualified, I moved into the tech space, enjoyed the boom and bust of the dot-com industry, and then moved into a small engineering company. During my tenure there, I was there for almost 17 years, 12 of those as CEO. We scaled that business from revenues of about 3 million to almost 100 million. Those revenues initially were concentrated largely in Ireland, and we exported eventually to almost 100 countries globally and set up offices in 6 continents. I later discovered that what we did was actually called scaling. So it only entered the business lexicon really in the last 7-8 years. And when I retired from the previous business, prior to that, people were really curious. Others in business, in SME businesses, were really curious about what we were doing to scale our business. And I was having more conversations with people about our journey and the principles which I felt undergirded our success. And it was only really when I retired and started to dig into this further that I discovered that there are 5.7 million SMEs in the UK. And those SMEs are significant in that they contribute £2 trillion worth of revenue to the UK economy. More than 90% of businesses by volume are SMEs, and more than 70% of the working population work in SMEs. So they have a significant impact on our communities, society, the economy at large. Of that £2 trillion worth of revenue delivered by those 5.7 million SMEs, half of that comes from 34,000 SMEs. Those are scale-ups, so 0.6%. I felt that's a really sad statistic, that only 34,000 are achieving scale.
Mm-hmm. So it's wasted potential.
Absolutely. And I was really I'd spent a number of years examining, what is it that I really enjoy doing? What is it that I'm good at? What value can I bring to the world? And ultimately, what will the world deliver back to me in terms of the value that I bring? So essentially, the intersection of those four questions, based on a Japanese concept called Ikigai, really landed my own purpose to inspire, connect, and enable ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. So everything that I do now is focused on that purpose. The company that we established, Simple Scaling, co-founded that business with Claire Colvin, my business partner. We established our own vision, which your vision becomes the fullest expression of your purpose at the point in which you craft it. Very simply, we created a target vision to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose. So that was the catalyst then for writing the book, in terms of reaching as wide an audience as we could, for actually establishing the podcast, for creating our own program to coach and guide CEOs to scale. That's a 1-year program, aligned to the 10 principles of scaling, which we define within our book. So that's I suppose that's a long-winded way of saying that's what gets me up in the mornings, Rich.
Well, it's a very precise purpose, and it's one that society really needs, because productivity has basically plateaued in the Western world. And not only that, there's so much potential out there, as I said earlier, with companies that are truly amazing, and the products and services that they deliver. A lot of our customers are in very interesting and innovative growth areas, but there are so many potential pitfalls and glass ceilings and just things that will get in the way of that business reaching its fullest potential, for its own founders and for the impact it'll make to its stakeholder group, but to the wider economy. So I think it's a brilliant purpose. It's interesting for Flowlens. Our purpose is to help our customers our manufacturers be the best that they can be.
Yeah, brilliant.
Which is, sort of sums up just our attitude towards how we help our customers, whether that's the service they get from us or the people or the product, so it's a good reminder every morning of what you're doing, particularly on the difficult days. And that kind of brings me to my first question. So you mentioned in the book, you've digested and crystallized that all that you're learning into these 10 principles. And a lot of people might think it's about the market, or about product innovation or differentiators, but you've chosen mindset as the first principle. So I'm really keen to understand why did you put that first in the principle life cycle?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you've touched on part of it. Look, there's nothing new about the importance of mindset. Mindset ultimately determines how we experience our own reality. We determine that ultimately the psyche, the mindset of the founder or leader of the organization, acts as either a multiplier of the potency of all of the other 9 principles, or actually it impedes the efficacy or impact of the other 9 principles. Simply the way the leader thinks is a determinant of scaling success. Now, and at this point, when we talk about scaling, the product market fit has already been proven. Your observation level is typically £1 million revenue with a team of 10 to 15 people. And I assert that if you have a wonderful product or service, you have an obligation to bring this to the world. Yeah. And what we found in our research is that lack of ambition of the SME leader is the single greatest impediment as to why SMEs don't achieve scale. Now, when you start to unpack lack of ambition, ambition is a mindset. There are people waking up this morning who have set themselves significant, bold, ambitious goals and are motivated towards the attainment of those goals. There are others who will struggle to actually take the duvet down from their head this morning. They lack that ambition. Now, somewhere in between lies those SMEs, those SME leaders who have determined for whatever reason that they do not want to scale. And that's a mindset. That's entirely to do with the way you think. And ultimately, there is nothing new about this. You go back to Stoic philosophy thousands of years ago, which is rooted in the importance of mindset. James Allen wrote a wonderful little book in 1903, a book that actually we coach on our program called As a Man Thinketh. As a man thinketh, so he will become. And ultimately, your mindset is the mental lens by which you interact with the world and interpret the world. It's that old cliched saying of, do you see the glass half full or half empty? Scaling leaders see the glass half full, and not in a reckless, carefree way. This, having this positive mindset, irrespective of what's going on around them. They choose to see things differently. If you change the way you look at things, the way you look at things change. And it's understanding that the reality is we're in control of nothing, none of this, other than the thoughts that we think. When we woke up this morning, we decided to do this podcast. We don't have to. But we decided to do this podcast. You decided to launch your podcast. That all starts with a thought. Everything begins with a thought. And what you think determines how you feel, determines how you act, and ultimately the results that you get. Everything. So ultimately, this platform that we're using, Riverside, started with a thought in somebody's head to create a platform to support podcast hosts to record quality podcasts. The computer that we're using, the camera that I'm looking at, all of these start with a thought in somebody's head, a thought that ultimately they decide to act upon and manifest into a product. So everything that we touch and we interact with at some point started with a thought. And ultimately, from an SME leader's perspective, from a scaling perspective, it's really important for scaling leaders to become aware of the quality and tonality of their thinking, to start to think about their thinking, and ultimately determine, does that thinking serve the vision that they have created, if indeed they've created a vision in the first place. And in order to create a vision, you must put yourself in a place where you can think positive thoughts, where you can dream about a future that exists beyond the current state. That requires us to lean on our imagination. Or, it was Einstein that said, logic will get you from A to B, imagination will get you to everywhere. And ultimately, the faculty, or imaginative faculty, is one of the highest mental faculties that distinguish us between all other mammals. We can imagine a future state. We can think about and dream about something in the future. What most people tend to do, the research suggests we have 60 or 70,000 thoughts a day. The vast majority of those thoughts are a recycling of past traumas, of things that you can no longer do anything about, but we continue to recycle them, which causes us to feel the same emotions, which cause us to act in the same way, which cause us to get the same results that we've always got. So when you start to understand that actually changing the way we think can ultimately change, it's the cause, and ultimately the effect is the outcome within our lives, that this is a critical multiplier of the efficacy of all of the other principles. And that's why, you can go down the rabbit hole deeply of psyche and mindset, but that's why it's so critically important. Let me give you an example. Two leaders that I have had the privilege of coming to know over in recent years. One of those leaders I met yesterday. He is the leader of an incredible scaling business with a really bright future ahead. We met because he had just been to the Berkshire Hathaway shareholder meeting to put himself in front of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, the most successful investors on the planet. He bought shares in Berkshire Hathaway quite a number of years ago so that he would have the opportunity to attend that shareholders meeting. And he brought along to that his 6-year-old son. His belief is that because he has an interest in investing and scaling his own business, his belief is always go to the source. So he flew to the States and went to that Berkshire Hathaway meeting. Contrast that against another leader who is struggling at the moment, who is a second-generation leader, who has a very traditional view on the hybrid working environment, who believes that all his employees should be in the office doing their 9 to 5, who doesn't believe in reading, who says, I cannot read, I am not a reader. So contrast both, and which one of those companies which one of those leaders would you invest in? One's struggling.
Exactly.
And the other is thriving.
It's very much the sort of fixed versus growth mindset there, isn't it?
Absolutely. And
one has a closed view of how to do business. The other one is pushing the boundaries and putting themselves out of their comfort zone and being inspiring their 6-year-old son or daughter to witness all of that. It's completely it's chalk and cheese basically.
Yeah, you've hit on a couple of things there. One is the growth versus fixed mindset, and the other is actually getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. So what we have discovered through our own research is that scaling leaders have a growth mindset. It's steeped in the work of Carol Dweck, who wrote the wonderful book called Mindset. And they tend to not put limits on themselves. So you'll not hear a growth-oriented leader saying, I can't do that. That will typically be suffixed with the word yet, which leaves it very, very open that I'm on a journey. I may not be able to achieve what it is that I want to achieve yet, but I will be able to do that in the future. It's been very cautious of the statement I am. If you say I am not a reader, what follows I am tends to follow you, which is where affirmations become so very powerful in terms of actually seeding your subconscious with the notion that actually you can do something, that you are something. Incantations are even more powerful when you say these affirmations out loud. It's understanding that leader who has a very traditional mindset about working relationships, about working hours, and about the new hybrid environment can change his view at any time. But again, without going deep into this, what we've come to learn is that actually our beliefs, which ultimately form our identity, are very much formed by the time we're 7 or 8 years of age. It's why Aristotle said, give me the man and give me the boy until he is 7 and I'll show you the man. Ultimately, at that stage, we're operating in a theta state. We're open to being programmed. So this is why your environment and your parenting your schooling is so critically important in those early years. Genetics play a part as well, as we've come to learn. So once you understand that those beliefs are largely not your own, they're what have been programmed, and we know all about the challenge of beliefs in Northern Ireland, Rich. Depending on which side of the street you grew up on.
Let's not go there.
That's a very different podcast. But you can understand we didn't inherit those beliefs. Those beliefs were embedded into us at very, very early stages, and the important aspect of this is, your belief forms your identity, and the greatest force of the human personality is our desire to stay consistent with our own identity. So we'll receive in information through our 5 senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, and we will interpret that information and process that information aligned to our own identity, basically the culmination of our beliefs, our habits, our attitudes. But we can change those at any point in time. And this is why the second principle, purpose and vision, becomes so critically important, because once you have decided and taken the time, and less than 1% of leaders do this, articulate what it is exactly that you want, then every time you have a thought, you can determine whether that thought, which is going to cause a feeling and subsequent action, serves the vision for the future or not. Does this serve my vision? And if it doesn't, the important point here is to become self-aware, first of all, about the thoughts that you're thinking and whether that's consistent with the vision that you've created in the future. And if it's consistent with serving that vision, then continue with it. If it's not, then change it.
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with Flowlens. Now, back to the interview.
Brings me to a question. You've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs and leaders now through the program and the work that you've been doing for the last 3 years. How do you work with them in the early stages to help them develop that self-awareness, or do many of them come with it, or what sort of traits do you see those people either accepting or developing if they don't already have them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Many don't, and we're all on this journey. I interviewed Professor Damien Hughes from the High Performance podcast in one of the earlier seasons. I think it was episode 2 or 3. A wonderful guy, and he said the mastery of life is to actually get involved in me-search, not research. It's understanding yourself. I always say, scaling happens from the inside out. So what do I mean by that? Those leaders that come through our 12-month program, what I find is that they become much more self-aware and a lot less self-conscious. So they're aware of how their thinking and how their actions and behaviors have a ripple effect, either positively or negatively, on their team and ultimately the organization. They're a lot less self-conscious. They're a lot less fearful of how they're judged. They remove self-limiting beliefs. They call those self-limiting beliefs out in the first instance. And many, believe it or not, that would appear on the outside to be very confident in their roles, actually in the very early stages of the program, people become very vulnerable given the way we coach through the program, and will expose that they're suffering from imposter syndrome, that actually they do not feel that they're capable of the role that they're in. Maybe they're a second generation leader and they've inherited the role, and they feel obligated to fulfill the vision of the original founder. We feel that actually they develop, as one participant said at the end of the program when he was in a room with his peers who had also graduated from the program, said, "This has been such a wonderful experience. I've developed this easy confidence that I've never had. It's not arrogance, but this easy confidence. I'm comfortable with myself. I know who I am. I can be authentic. I'm not trying to be somebody else." So we find that this process of becoming more self-aware leads to a deeper understanding of what makes them, of their own sense of purpose. They begin to, I've seen personal transformations, people who understand that if I'm going to create a vision for the future, then dragging myself out of the bed in the morning after shutting the alarm off 10 times, lifting up my phone first thing, scrolling the news, grabbing a slice of toast as I run out the house, gurning at the kids on the way out, and arriving into my team for a meeting is not the best way that I should present myself if I want to lead this wonderful organization to deliver a bright new future. So we see on a practical sense that people start to be very, very deliberate about what they're taking in. A lot of them stop watching the news because it's not conducive to actually creating a vision for the future. It doesn't support what they're trying to do. They become very deliberate and intentional about the network that they keep. We talk about, bringing radiators into your life and removing the drains, looking for those positive role models, those positive influences, and spending a lot of time with them. As Jim Rohn said, you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And again, research suggests that that's very true. So, by the very fact that they're putting themselves into a program, we run 2 cohorts, the maximum number is 12 in each cohort, and with other like-minded peers who are willing to be very vulnerable up front. At the other end of that, people go through this personal transformation that is hugely rewarding for us, but changes their lives, changes the lives of their team, and ultimately the destiny of their organization. I've received Christmas presents from the partners of the participants on our program, saying, "I'm not sure what you've done with this man, but he is, he's changed for the better. It's been wonderful." People have taken steps to lose weight, to pick up an old hobby that they had abandoned through the busyness of their lives. They have started physical fitness activities. They have started reading again for the first time since they left school. They've embedded rituals like cold exposure, for example, into their daily routines. Anything that's going to make them feel better about themselves is ultimately going to have a positive impact on their team and their organization. They become much more tuned into the fact that this isn't about them; it's about their team and their organization. They become more focused on being the star maker rather than the star. They become much better communicators, more confident in their articulation of where they're going. They feel much less judgment, or less caring about judgment. They're much less fearing of failure. We had one participant who came onto the program. His business was already incredibly successful. It was turning over 25 million revenue. He disclosed to us very quietly, his vision. We always ask the question, if we were having a beer and, there was no one here and you were disclosing to us your dream for the future, what is that dream? What is your real dream? And his dream was to reach 1 billion people on this planet with the wonderful product that he and his company had developed. And by the end of the program, he had acquired 3 companies. The combined revenue was 60 million. And one of those companies, which was a champagne moment for him, was his nemesis, his single biggest competitor. And the champagne moment was whenever the leader of that business came out on social media articulating and communicating the vision which the leader who'd been on our program had articulated and communicated to us 9 months prior.
Yeah.
So, they become also much more collaborative in their thinking. We have had formal partnerships emerge as a result of participants going through the program. And ultimately they become much more conscious about creating positive growth cultures, understanding that this isn't the soft stuff. Really, this is the hard stuff.
Yeah. Just on that point about purpose, and is there like a personal statement of purpose that's in your head? It's more something that, and I'm talking about you and the kind of people that you work with, and the organizational purpose. You have to kind of figure out what motivates you to achieve that vision, or do you find they're mainly very aligned?
Yeah, well, again, that's all part of the me search. It's understanding, people get caught up in the what's my purpose? I haven't found my purpose yet. It's understanding through that self-examination of what really juices you up. Why do you do what you do? Really, what is it? If you said it, if you say to someone, let's say, you say, so, what would you love to achieve? Well, I want to be rich. You go, well, yeah, but we all want to be rich. Why do you want to be rich? Well, I want to, I want to have really nice things. Well, why do you want to have really nice things? Well, I'd love to give my kids the future that I've never had and expose them to activities that my parents could never afford me to have, so that ultimately they could express and find and unlock the full range of their talents on this planet. You go, oh, well, that's very different from what you initially said, which was to be rich. Now we're getting closer to understanding why you do what you do, and asking why lots of times, and really being tuned in, being that forensic scientist of understanding why you do what you do in any given day, week, month, year. I invite people to actually keep an inventory of the things that they absolutely love doing, the things that really lend themselves to their unique ability. And everyone has a unique ability. And it's understanding what that unique ability, and ultimately what you want to ensure is that the environment that you create and the vision that you create allows you to express fully that unique ability. So let's take Lionel Messi as an example. Lionel Messi's ambition, if you go back a number of years ago when he was playing in Barcelona, his ambition, I've never spoken to him, but let's assume his ambition was to be the best striker in the world, to be the number one, and to achieve, X number of Ballon d'Ors. Now, that purpose was aligned to the purpose of FC Barcelona, who wanted to be the best club in the world. So now you've got the personal purpose of Lionel Messi aligned to the organizational purpose of FC Barcelona. And that's when magic happens. That's when the environment that FC Barcelona and the purpose and vision that they have for the future of the club is actually aligned to what Lionel Messi wants at a personal level. And, if we go deeper on that, essentially the role of any leader should be really to understand and create that golden thread between what the organizational vision is versus what that purpose and vision is of the individuals that work within that organization. And the more robust and clear that golden thread becomes, ultimately, by virtue of you continue to make progress against your organizational vision, you can support that team member in creating theirs, and they will give you their everything because ultimately, in pursuit of the organizational vision, they'll achieve their own vision aligned to their purpose.
They're aligned. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Happy days. There's a huge amount to unpack there, and I'd recommend that anyone listening, get a copy of Simple Scaling, and also check out your podcast, Brendan. I have a feeling for our next series, I might try and convince you to come back, and there's so much to unpack, and even just what we've talked about. Never mind principles 3, 4, 5, and upwards. So to sort of bring it together, thinking about that founder, that leader who is maybe stuck, and I like to use that term, like glass ceiling. They're not sure what is the thing that's holding them back. But what advice or action would you give them today? To step back and do that me search, and think about.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would encourage people to search for the flea in the jar experiment on YouTube, and it's literally 60 seconds, and it's a little experiment. The scientist puts these fleas in a jar. There's no lid on the jar, and the fleas can jump out of the jar very, very easily. The scientist puts a lid then on the jar and leaves the lid in the jar on top of the jar for 3 days. So in those 3 days, the fleas have been jumping, hitting their head off the lid, hitting their head off the lid, and they eventually train themselves to the point where actually they stop hitting themselves off the lid. The lid is then removed from the jar, and the fleas never again jump out of the jar. And when people understand that their beliefs are like the lid on that jar, more often than not, we have these self-limiting beliefs imposed on ourselves. So practically, what do I encourage people to do? Begin to think about your thinking. And I find journaling very, very powerful. So understand, what brought me great energy today? Who were the people, places, projects that I was working on today that brought me great energy? And when did I feel drained of energy? Similarly, so who were the people, places, projects that I was working on that actually drained my energy? And start to get an understanding of the things that really lend themselves to your unique ability, that bring you into, again, it's another podcast, bring you into that flow state. So journaling is very, very powerful. Aligned with that, I would say read more. Every challenge that you will encounter, somebody has encountered it before and taken the time to write a book on it, to share their experiences. So nothing that you're encountering do you have to encounter alone. Somebody's been there and done it beforehand. So read more. And I suppose in the tradition of my own podcast, where I give 3 timeless takeaways, I'll share with you one further to close. And in all of this, be kind to yourself. This is a journey, not a destination. You don't defer your happiness in this scaling journey. Don't say, I will be happy when my business is turning over 5 million. I will be happy when my business is turning over 10 million. I will be happy when my business turn over 50 million or 100 million or whatever that figure or that metric of performance is, in which you have said, I won't be happy until. You will never be happy. I can guarantee you now, if you defer your happiness to the point when you're trying to achieve 10 million, as soon as you get close to it, you'll say, I think I'll be really happy when we get 20 million. You'll get close to 20 million. I think I will be really happy when I get 50 million. You won't enjoy the journey along the way, because at the end of the day, I think it was Rumi said, we're just walking each other home.
It's a lovely way to put it. Contentment is something that is a hard thing to come by when you're striving all the time, but taking time to smell the roses is well worth doing. Once you've come so far, and I think it reflects on to your team as well, that you appreciate the effort that it takes to make every day happen, even if you're still striving for that next summit. So
couldn't agree more.
And appreciation. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
Brilliant. Well, Brendan, thanks again. I highly recommend, as I say, your website is simplescaling.com.
That's it.
Yeah, and obviously your book's on Amazon, and the podcast is on all good podcasting platforms. So I highly recommend that people check it out. And thanks very much, Brendan, for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real delight to be on the show today, Rich. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.
A fascinating chat, and thanks again to Brendan for being our guest this week. I'm a big believer in so much of what Brendan has to say, particularly about how our mindset is the lens through which we experience the world, and how that can be the determinant between success and failure. He echoes what lean methodology expert Tom Hughes said in episode 2, that improvement starts with the self, and business success is a journey that starts within. Deep stuff, but really important to consider. Next episode, I'll be talking to Verity Davidge from Make UK. In her role as Head of Policy, Verity plays a key part in Make UK's mission to champion the manufacturing sector on behalf of its 20,000 plus members. We talk about the latest trends in manufacturing, including digital transformation, the ongoing labour and supply chain crises, and what SME manufacturers like you can do to thrive in the current climate and prepare for the low carbon future. If you found today's episode useful, please do subscribe, rate and review our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Amazon or wherever you get your podcasts. And thanks again for listening. Till next time.